Learn how you can use ActivityKit, WidgetKit and SwiftUI to support Dynamic Island in your iOS 16 apps today. This video does not have a sponsor. If you like my work or learn something from my videos, please consider subscribing, liking, and if you're an indie developer, have a look at Launch Buddy, which you can try out for free on the Mac App Store to manage your projects. Okay, so this video will go through ActivityKit and WidgetKit and a bit of SwiftUI and explain to you how you can add Dynamic Island support to your apps in a few different steps. First of all, we will be tackling live activities, how they work, how you can start and stop them. Then we will be adding the widget extension, have a look at the lock screen live activity, and at the very end we will add the Dynamic Island support and add different views that are displayed in the Dynamic Island. I have already prepared a starter project here, and it's just a very basic time tracker app. It has no persistence or anything. It's just a big green button, and if the user clicks it, then the timer will start and the time will be measured. Then when they click it again, the timer is stopped. There's really nothing saved anywhere or anything. This is just a very, very simple example to get us started with this project. So first of all, when talking about live activities, you need to be aware that they are state driven. So you don't actually update the SwiftUI views that are shown in the activity. You just update their state, similar to any SwiftUI app really. And that state is called activity attributes. So first of all, let's set these activity attributes up. So I'm hitting Command N here to create a new Swift file, and I will call this time tracking attributes. Let's hit create. In here we need to import ActivityKit, and then we will need to create a struct, give it that exact same name as the file, so in our case time tracking attributes, and this will need to conform to the activity attributes protocol. In order to conform to the protocol, we will need a type alias and a content state. So first of all, let's create a type alias. It will be called time tracking status, and it stands for our content state. And this is basically all of your add state variables that you would usually have in your SwiftUI views. Where does this come from? Well, it doesn't exist yet. We will have to create a new struct called content state. And this struct needs to conform to both codable and hashable. Inside of this struct, we can now define all of the variables that could be updated over time. If we have variables that are not part of the state and that are just fixed, we can also leave them outside of the struct. So in our case, we just have the start time of the timer, and that's just a date. And to use date, we need to import foundation. Okay, so this is the state that drives our live activity. It's just a start time. We don't need anything else. The rest will actually be handled by a very handy overload of the text view in SwiftUI for us. Okay, so now that we have these attributes, let's have a look at how we can start live activities from inside of our SwiftUI app. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the logic here. We have one button, which is this green circle right now, and it either says start or stop, and it's either green or red depending on the state. So when we are tracking time, or when we are starting to track time, which is basically this if clause here, then we want to start the live activity. And if we stop tracking time, we want to stop the live activity. Since live activities are part of the ActivityKit framework, we of course need to import ActivityKit at the top of our file. To start a live activity, there are just 3 simple steps. So first of all, we need to create an instance of our time tracking attributes. So let's say let attributes equal time tracking attributes. notice that this is just an empty initializer because our attributes don't have any fixed data associated with them. If you want to have a look at another example here, I will link another video that I made on ActivityKit a few weeks ago in the video description. Now that we have the attributes, we need to give them a start state. So let's create a new state, and this is our time tracking attributes dot content state. And we basically want to give it the start time that the activity or that the user wants to start tracking their time at. So in that case, they just want to start tracking their time right now. So we create a content state with the start time of now. And next, we need to request to start the live activity. So we can just say try. And now this is a bit complicated here, but you will get the gist of it. So there's a generic class activity, which takes in our time tracking attributes as a generic. And then on this class, we can just call the request function. We pass in our attributes and we pass in our content state. And now one very important part here is there's also another argument that has a default value, hence why it's not shown, but we need to actually provide nil here for the push type. Otherwise the live activity will not actually be shown to the user. And that is basically already it. Now you see Xcode displaying a warning here, and that's because this request function returns a activity. So let's option click on it. Then you will see it returns an activity of our attributes. We don't really need that, but for the sake of this video, let's actually save that for a state variable. So let's create a state variable called activity, which is of type activity with the generic over our time tracking attributes. It is optional since at the beginning, when starting the app, there is of course no activity running. And then we can just assign everything here to our activity variable. And just like this, we have already created our first live activity and it's already running on the user's device. Next, let's have a look at how we can end that live activity, and it's equally as simple. To end the live activity, it's almost as simple as starting it. So we actually still need our start time, so I'm not setting it to nil quite yet. Remember, the start time is just our local variable here to track when the user started tracking their time, and it's also used to display this little timer up here using the relative style of SwiftUI's text. So we just need to create a new state, which is of course a time tracking attributes.content state. The start time is the exact same as before, but we need to pass this to the next function call that we will do. This function is asynchronous, so we need to wrap it inside of a task. And then we can just say await our activity that we have saved here earlier. This is of course optional. And then we can just say end using our state, and the dismissal policy, we will just say it should immediately dismiss. There's one more little issue here, and that's that our start time is actually an optional date. So we can just say guard let start time else return, just to make sure that it's not optional. And then at the bottom here, we of course need to say self.starttime equals nil, because this variable overshadows this state variable. Okay, so now we already have the logic to start the live activity. We also have the logic to end the live activity. Before we can actually have a look at adding the widget extension and displaying the live activity on the lock screen or dynamic island, there's one more thing we really need to do. And that is to go into our project file, go into the info tab, click plus anywhere in the list, and add a new key called ns supports live activities. And we need to set that to true, of course, or to yes. With this in place, we can now actually start live activities but there's nothing to see yet as we haven't added a widget extension quite yet. So let's have a look at that next. Okay, so to add a widget extension, just go to File, New Target, search for widget, give it some sort of name, so I will just call it tutorial widget. I will not say that this should include a live activity because we will just write that from scratch. Hit finish. I don't want to activate the scheme. And now we will have a widget and a widget bundle. And I will actually get rid of everything in the widget right now just to show you how you can set it up yourself. So first of all, we're using ActivityKit again. So let's import ActivityKit. Now there are two structs we need to set up. First of all, the widget struct, and secondly, our actual SwiftUI view that is displayed on the lock screen. So let's start by defining the widget. And let me have a look at how it's called here in the bundle. It's called tutorial widget. All right. So let's copy over that name. And this one, of course, needs to conform to the widget protocol. Now the widget just needs a body, and that's the wrong autocomplete here. So let's just say var body is some widget configuration. All right. And then in here, we can just define our activity configuration. This now has a few different arguments, and we'll have a look at each of them separately. So first of all, we need to pass in the type of our activity attributes. You remember we called them time tracking attributes, but if we paste that in here and of course add the .self, Xcode will complain because the time tracking attributes are just part of our basic app and they're not part of the widget extension. So let's go to that file, open up the inspector on the right, and make sure it is also a member of the widget extension target. And just by doing that, you will see the syntax highlighting now picks up on these attributes and the error is gone. Next up, we have two closures here. The first closure is for the view that is displayed on the lock screen as a live activity on all iOS 16.1 and above devices. And then the second one, as the name suggests, is what is displayed in the dynamic island. This of course only currently works on iPhone 14 Pro and iPhone 14 Pro Max devices, as none of the other devices have a dynamic island. What we get into these closures is an activity view context that just contains our attributes and just contains the state or the content state of our widget. So let's just call these context here, and the same for the dynamic island closure. And now inside of this activity configuration, we can just add some sort of SwiftUI view. So I like to extract that into its own view. So I will just call this time tracking widget view. This is a SwiftUI view. It of course has a body and it takes in our context that we get here as the closure parameter. So we will just say let context, and that is an activity view context over our time tracking attributes as a generic. I think by now you have noticed that ActivityKit heavily uses the generic over the activity attributes protocol that we have defined. And now in the body we can do whatever. If you want to learn more about this, you can have a look at my ActivityKit video that I already mentioned beforehand, which is linked down in the video description. In this case, we will just do a very simple UI here, and for that we will basically use the same thing as we did in the main app. So we will just use a text with a relative style. So let me just add a text with this overload here where we pass in a date and then a style of relative. Now this will not be a pretty widget whatsoever, but it will get the job done. And the date is just our context.state, which is our time tracking attributes.content state, so that inner struct that we defined earlier, and then of that state, it only has one variable, which is the start time. Okay, so now we can use this time tracking widget view here in our activity configuration, time tracking widget view, and we just pass in the context that we get here inside of the closure. Next, let's have a very quick look at the dynamic island. This does not take in a regular SwiftUI view. Instead, it takes in an dynamic island. There's this initializer here which has a bunch of closures, and I will explain them to you, and then you can create your own designs in your own time. So the first one is the dynamic island expanded region, and this one actually also needs its own type here. So this is not just a SwiftUI view. So we will need to create dynamic island expanded region with a position and content. So as a position, I will just say I want this to be leading, and then the content is just a SwiftUI view. Now, to make it easy to understand which of these closures here resembles which area of the dynamic island, I will just put their name inside of text, and then we will have a look at what the simulator tells us. So this is the expanded region. Next is the compact leading type. So I will just say CL for compact leading. And once again, we'll have a look at this in just a second. Then we have compact trailing, CT. And then we also have the minimal type. Inside of these, you could add countdowns or whatever, of course. This is just for us to have a look at how it actually behaves. So now let's make sure we have selected the iPhone 14 Pro, so we have the dynamic island. And now we can actually run the project in the simulator. Okay, so here's the app. It looks exactly the same as in the preview, of course. Let's press the green start button and you will see it will start counting up. There is nothing in the dynamic island right now because the app is running. So let's go to the lock screen. And let's say keep here. And there you have it. This is our time tracking widget view. As you know, it's just a super simple stuff. It's just a SwiftUI text that counts up how long we've been tracking time right now. Of course, you would definitely want to improve this design here. I'm just showing you how the API works, and I'm not a graphic designer, so you can do that yourself. So as you can see, the lock screen support works like a charm. And now if we go to the home screen, you can see the app automatically expanded into the dynamic island, and we can see both the compact leading and the compact trailing areas here. So they will be shown at the same time in this case. And then if we long press on it, we will see the main area. So you will notice that we did not see the minimal area here where we would just have displayed an M, and that's because that is only displayed if a second activity would be running at the same time. So I'm afraid I can't show you that right now, but you've probably already seen how this works. It would then be just its own blob on the side here with just one of these two areas, whereas if your activity is the only one running right now, you would have both compact leading and compact trailing to yourself. And if the user presses and holds, it would show the dynamic island expanded region. Now we specified the alignment of leading, so of course our text is leading aligned here. You can play around with this as much as you want. And then again, if we go to the lock screen now, you will see that the live activity is displayed on the lock screen as well. Even if we lock the device, then it will automatically gray out. And the SwiftUI animation is actually smart enough to only show the minutes then instead of also the seconds as well. Just like this. And then we can click that live activity, go back to the app. You will see the timer is synced up now. I'm sorry for the German formatting here. Updating to the newest Xcode version must have messed up my language settings. And now if we hit stop, then it's gone. And then you will also notice that it's gone from the lock screen as well as the dynamic island. Alright, so in this video you learned about ActivityKit, what activity attributes are, how live activities work, how you can start and end them. You learned about a very important info.plist key called ns supports live activities. You learned how to write your own widget extension with an activity configuration for a lock screen widget or a lock screen live activity and dynamic island support using the dynamic island type and the dynamic island expanded region type, and then you just used SwiftUI views in there We just had examples here, but you can feel free to be creative. If you're working on a cool ActivityKit app, feel free to tag me on Twitter at FloWritesCode. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.